Ambassador Lee Tiemann sat in his chair and looked around the huge meeting room. The walls were made of white crystal that seemed to glow with its own light. 12 different alien species sat at the long table. Each one looked very different from the others. Some had blue skin, others had many arms. A few had eyes that glowed like small stars. Tiemann had been coming to these meetings for 10 years. Every year, the aliens made the same promises. Every year, they broke them. The humans always got the worst jobs. They always got the smallest share of resources. When there was fighting to be done, the aliens called on humans. When there was dangerous work, humans did it. But when it came time to make important decisions, the aliens told humans to be quiet. Commander Park Ji-won stood behind Tiemann. She wore her military uniform with pride. Her hand rested on her weapon, but she knew she would never use it here. These meetings were supposed to be about peace, but Ji-won had seen enough war to know that. Sometimes peace was just another word for surrender. The meeting had been going on for 3 hours. The Alteran delegate, a tall creature with silver skin and 4 arms, was talking again. His name was Vexthal, and he spoke like he was the most important being in the galaxy. The mining rights to the Kepler system must go to the Alteran Empire, Vexthal said. His voice was cold and proud. We have the technology to extract the resources properly. The humans would just waste them with their crude methods. Tiemann felt his jaw tighten. The Kepler system had been discovered by human explorers. Human miners had worked there for 20 years. Human engineers had built the facilities that made mining possible. But now the aliens wanted to take it all away. With respect, Tiemann said, standing up slowly, the Kepler system was found and developed by humans. Our people have lived and worked there for 2 decades. We have families there. Children who were born there. Vexthal made a sound that might have been laughter. Humans are so emotional about everything. You think because you found something first, it belongs to you forever. This is why your species will never be truly civilized. Other aliens around the table nodded. The Kavani Trade Minister Zefter clicked his beak in agreement. The Draknari General, Thaxmer, showed his sharp teeth in what humans had learned. Was a smile of mockery. Dr. Kim Soo-young sat at the far end of the human delegation. She was quiet, as always, but Tiemann could see the anger in her eyes. Soo-young had created the communication systems that let all these different species talk to each other across the galaxy. Without her work, this meeting could not even happen. But the aliens acted like she was not even there. Perhaps, said the elder representative Kelthas in his soft voice, we could find a compromise. The humans could continue to work in the Kepler system, but under Alteran supervision. Tiemann almost laughed. That was always the Eldarin solution. Let humans do the hard work, but put aliens in charge. It was supposed to sound fair, but it never was. That is generous, Vexthal said, but humans are too unpredictable. They get angry when they do not get their way. They start fights. It would be better if they just accepted their role in the galaxy. And what role is that? Commander Ji-won asked. Her voice was calm, but there was danger in it. Vexthal turned to look at her. You are good soldiers? Decent workers? You follow orders well, most of the time, but you lack the wisdom to lead. You are too young as a species, too primitive. The word hung in the air like poison. Primitive. Tiemann had heard it 1,000 times over the years. It was what the aliens called humans when they wanted to put them in their place. You think we are primitive? Tiemann said slowly. But who built the hyperspace networks that let your ships travel between stars? Who designed the fusion reactors that power your cities? Who created the medical systems that keep your people alive? Those were team efforts, Zefter said quickly. Many species worked together on those projects. Yes, Dr. Soo-young said, speaking for the first time that day. Her voice was quiet, but everyone heard her. Many species worked together. But who did the actual work? Who solved the problems when everything went wrong? Who stayed up all night making sure the systems worked properly? She stood up slowly. She was small compared to most of the aliens, but somehow she seemed to fill the room. I designed the quantum communication network that lets you talk to your homeworlds. Every message you send goes through systems I created. Every call you make uses equations I wrote. Vexthel waved one of his hands dismissively. You had help from Alteron scientists. Did I? Su-Yang asked. She pulled out a small device and pressed a button. The air above the table filled with complex mathematical equations. These are the core algorithms that make faster-than-light communication possible. Can any of you read them? The aliens looked at the equations floating in the air. None of them spoke. These equations took me 15 years to develop, Su-Yang continued. I worked alone in a small laboratory with no funding from any alien government. When I finally succeeded, you all said it was a team effort. You all took credit, but not one of you understands how it actually works. Thaxmer, the Draknari general, slammed his fist on the table. Enough of this. Humans, know your place. You are here because we allow it. You exist in this galaxy because we permit it. That was when Tiemann made his decision. He had been thinking about this moment for years, hoping it would not come. But knowing that it probably would, he stood up and looked around the table at all the alien faces. Some were curious, some were angry. All of them thought they were better than humans. You are right about one thing, Tiemann said calmly. Humans do get emotional. We get angry when we are treated unfairly. We get sad when our friends are hurt. We get excited when we discover something new. You think this makes us weak. You think this makes us primitive. He walked around the table, looking each alien in the eyes as he passed them. But our emotions also make us determined. They make us creative. They make us willing to work harder than anyone else to build something better. He stopped and turned to face the entire group. For 50 years, humans have tried to find their place in this galaxy. We have followed your rules. We have accepted your decisions. We have done your dirty work. And what did we get for it? You call us primitive. You take our discoveries and call them your own. You treat us like children who should be grateful for whatever scraps you give us. Commander Jiwan stepped forward to stand beside him. Dr. Su-Yang did the same. Soon all the humans in the room were standing together. We are done, Tiemann said simply. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council. We withdraw from all treaties. We withdraw from all joint projects. Effective immediately, humans will have nothing more to do with galactic civilization. The aliens started talking all at once. Some shouted. Some laughed. Vexthel stood up, his forearms spread wide. You cannot do this, he said. You need us. Without the Council, humans are nothing. You will come crawling back within a year, begging us to take you back? Tiemann smiled. It was not a happy smile, but it was not sad either. It was the smile of someone who had finally made a choice they should have made long ago. Maybe, he said. Or maybe you will discover that you needed us more than we needed you. He turned and walked toward the door. The other humans followed him. Behind them, the aliens were still shouting and arguing. But the humans did not look back. As they reached the door, Dr. Su-Yang stopped and turned around one last time. She pulled out her device again and pressed another button. All around the room, the crystal walls began to flicker and go dark. The communication system started to shut down. The translation devices stopped working. By the way, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. All the technology you have been using to run this meeting, I designed that too. Good luck figuring out how to fix it. Then she walked out, leaving the aliens sitting in darkness, unable to understand each other's words. The final summit was over. And so was humanity's time in the Milky Way galaxy. Captain Cho Minho was drinking his morning coffee when the message came through. The bridge of his ship, the New Soul, was quiet in the early hours of the ship's day cycle. Most of his crew was still sleeping. He liked these peaceful moments. Before the work began, the communication panel beeped softly. Minho set down his cup and walked over to check the message. When he saw the encryption code, his heart started beating faster. This was the code they had all been waiting for, but hoping they would never see. The message was short and simple. Operation Homecoming begins now. Follow Protocol 7. Tell no one outside the crew. Move fast, move quiet. Minho stared at the message for a long moment. Then he deleted it and walked to the ship's intercom system. His voice was calm when he spoke, but his hands were shaking slightly. Attention all crew, report to your stations immediately. We have new orders. Within minutes his bridge was full of people. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Park Sulji, looked at him with questions in her eyes. She had served with him for 8 years. She knew when something big was happening. Sir? She asked quietly. Minho looked around at his crew. These people had followed him across the galaxy. They had trusted him through dangerous missions and long voyages. Now he had to ask them to trust him one more time. We are going home, he said. Simply, not to Earth, to our new home. The one we have been preparing for. The crew exchanged glances. They had all heard rumors about secret projects. About ships and supplies being sent to unknown locations. About preparations for something that no one talked about openly. Now they knew what it had all been for. How long do we have? Asked Engineer Yang Do-yun. 12 hours to finish our current mission, Minho replied. Then we jump to the rendezvous point. From there, we follow the fleet to coordinates that are not on any galactic map. Far away on the mining world of Kepler 442b, Engineer Yang Hin-woo was working the night shift. The mining station never stopped. It produced the rare metals that powered half the galaxy's technology. Thousands of workers from dozens of species depended on this place for their jobs, but tonight, only humans were working the critical systems. Hyun-woo's communicator buzzed. He looked at the message and nodded slowly. Then he called his team together. There were 30 human engineers working the night shift. All of them had been waiting for this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, he said quietly, it is time to go home. They worked quickly and quietly. The fusion reactors that powered the mining operations were incredibly complex. It had taken human engineers 20 years to build them and make them work properly. It would take the aliens much longer to figure out how to run them alone. Yun-woo and his team did not break anything. They were not vandals. But they did remove certain key components. They took the control programs that made the reactors run smoothly. They took the maintenance schedules that kept everything working. They took the technical manuals that explained how to fix problems. By morning, the mining station was still running, but it was running on borrowed time. Without human knowledge and human maintenance, the complex systems would begin to fail. Maybe in weeks, maybe in months. But they would fail on the communication hub at Vega Prime Technician Beak. Nari was doing similar work. The quantum relay networks that allowed instant communication across the galaxy were her specialty. She had helped design them. She had built many of them with her own hands. Now she was carefully shutting them down. The work was delicate. The quantum systems were fragile. One wrong move could cause explosions that would destroy entire space stations. But Nari knew these systems better than anyone. She had spent 15 years learning their secrets. She worked through the night, moving from station to station. Each quantum relay had emergency shutdown procedures. Nari activated them all, one by one. To anyone watching, it would look like routine maintenance. But Nari knew better. Without the quantum relays, communication across the galaxy would slow to a crawl. Messages that once took seconds to send would take months or years. The aliens would be cut off from each other, isolated on their distant worlds. Admiral Kang Do-yun stood on the bridge of the battleship, Inchin, and watched the evacuation begin. All around him, human ships were preparing to leave. Cargo vessels, loaded with families and personal belongings. Military ships full of soldiers and weapons. Science ships carrying years of research and discovery. It was the largest movement of people in human history. And it was happening in secret, right under the aliens' noses. Do-yun had been planning this evacuation for 10 years. Every detail had been considered. Every problem had been solved in advance. The aliens thought humans were disorganized and emotional. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral, his communications officer said, we are receiving confirmation from all sectors. The evacuation is proceeding on schedule, Do-Yun nodded. And the aliens? They suspect nothing, sir. Our intelligence reports show they think the humans are just having another one of their emotional outbursts. They expect us to calm down and come back to the negotiation table within a few days. Do-Yun almost smiled. The aliens had never understood humans, even after 50 years of working together. They thought human emotions made them weak and unpredictable. They never realized that human emotions also made them determined and focused. Time to final departure? Do-Yun asked. 72 hours, sir. All ships should be ready by then. The colony world of New Bizan, Governor Song Minji was leading the largest single evacuation in the operation. 2 million humans lived on New Bizan. They had farms and factories, schools and hospitals. They had built a civilization from nothing on a world that had been empty. When they arrived, now they were leaving it all behind, Minji walked through the capital city one last time. The streets were busy with people loading their belongings onto transports. Children who had never seen any world, but this one were saying goodbye to their friends. Adults were taking final pictures of the homes they had built with their own hands. It should have been sad. It should have been tragic. But Minji saw something else in the faces of her people. She saw determination. She saw hope. She saw the same spirit that had brought humans to the stars in the first place. Governor, her assistant said, running up to her with a tablet full of reports. The last transport will be ready in 6 hours. All essential personnel are accounted for. And the infrastructure? Minji asked. Shut down according to plan. The power grid will fail within a week. The water treatment plants will stop working in 10 days. The manufacturing facilities are already offline, Minji nodded. They were not destroying anything out of spite. They were simply taking their knowledge and their expertise with them. The aliens could have the empty buildings and the broken machines, but the understanding of how to make them work was leaving with the humans. As the sun set on New Bizan, the last human transport lifted off from the spaceport. Minji was on that transport, looking down at the world she had governed for 15 years. The cities were already going dark as the power systems began to shut down. Behind them, they left a planet full of empty buildings and silent machines. The aliens who had dismissed human achievements would now get a chance to maintain those achievements themselves. All across the galaxy, the same scene was playing out. Human colonies were evacuating. Human ships were disappearing into the void between stars. Human workers were walking away from their jobs, taking their knowledge and their skills with them. The aliens noticed, of course, but they thought it was temporary. They thought humans were throwing a tantrum that would end when they got hungry or scared or lonely. They had no idea that humans had been preparing for this day for years. They had no idea that there were secret colonies already established beyond the edge of the galaxy. They had no idea that humanity had been building a new civilization in the empty space between galaxies. Captain Cho Minho's ship was one of the last to leave. He had completed his mission and was now traveling toward the rendezvous point where the human fleet was gathering. Behind him, the galaxy was continuing its normal routine. Ships were still traveling between stars. Trade was still happening. Wars were still being fought, but something important had changed. The humans were gone, and with them went the invisible network of knowledge and expertise that had held galactic civilization together. The aliens did not know it yet. They would not understand it for weeks or months, but they had just lost the most important species in the galaxy. And they had lost them not through war or disaster, but through their own arrogance and stupidity. Minho looked at the stars ahead of him and smiled. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the galaxy, humanity was building something new, something better, something that would belong to them alone. The quiet exodus was almost complete. Soon the galaxy would begin to learn what it meant to live without humans. And the lesson would be harder than they could possibly imagine. Zephyr stared at the shipping reports on his desk and felt a cold feeling growing in his stomach. The numbers were wrong. They had to be wrong. But he had checked them 3 times, and they stayed the same. 60% of all cargo shipments were running late, Some were days behind schedule. Others had not arrived at all. Ships that should have reached their destinations weeks ago were still missing. Zefter was the Corvani trade minister for the entire Outer Rim sector. He had been managing interstellar commerce for 20 years. He had never seen anything like this. He called his assistant into his office. The young Corvani male looked nervous as he approached the desk. "Sir?" the assistant asked, clicking his beak anxiously. "These shipping reports," Zefter said, holding up the tablet. "Tell me there has been a mistake. Tell me the computers are broken." The assistant looked down at his feet. "I am sorry, sir. I have checked with all the major shipping companies. The reports are accurate. But how is this possible? We have the most efficient cargo network in galactic history. These delays should not be happening." The assistant was quiet for a moment. Then he said very softly, "Sir, most of our shipping coordinators were human. They left 3 months ago." Zefter felt the cold feeling in his stomach get worse. He had barely noticed when the humans left. There had been so many of them, working in so many different jobs, that he had never really thought about what they all did. Now he was beginning to understand. On the industrial world of Proxima Tertius, factory supervisor Colvin was having his own problems. The massive manufacturing complex that he managed had been running perfectly for 15 years. The machines never broke down. Production never stopped. Everything worked like clockwork. Until this week, Colvin walked through the factory floor, looking at the silent machines. Half of them had stopped working over the past few days. The other half were running badly, producing defective products that had to be thrown away. "What is wrong with them?" he asked his chief engineer, a Drachnary female named Vexara. "I do not know," she replied, her voice frustrated. "The machines are old, but they have always worked perfectly. The maintenance records show they were serviced regularly, but now they just keep breaking down." Colvin pulled up the maintenance records on his tablet. Page after page of technical reports, all signed by the same group of people. Human engineers, who had worked at the factory for years. "Where are the humans who used to do the maintenance?" he asked. "They left," Vexara said. "All of them. They said they were going home." "But they did not train anyone to replace them? They tried?" "But their maintenance procedures were very complicated. None of us really understood how they kept the old machines working so well." Colvin looked around at the factory that had made him rich and successful. Without the machines, he had nothing. And without the humans, the machines were just expensive junk. High Chancellor Mordain of the Alteran Empire was having the worst week of his political career. His office was full of reports from across the empire. Communication failures, transportation problems, industrial accidents, system breakdowns. At first, he had thought it was just bad luck. These things happened sometimes. But as the reports kept coming in, he began to see a pattern. Everything that was breaking down had been built or maintained by humans. His personal assistant, an elegant Alteran female named Silthara, brought him another stack of reports. Her normally perfect composure was beginning to crack. "Chancellor," she said, "the hyperspace navigation computers in the Vega sector have failed completely. 3 ships have been lost because they could not calculate safe jump routes." Mordain rubbed his temples. "What do the technicians say?" "They say the navigation algorithms are too complex. They were designed by human mathematicians. Without the original programmers, they cannot fix the systems when they break down." "And the communication blackouts? The same problem?" "The quantum relay networks were mostly built by human engineers. When the relays fail, no one knows how to repair them properly." Mordain stood up and walked to the window of his office. He could see the capital city of the Alteran Empire spread out below him. It was beautiful and advanced, a symbol of Alteran superiority over the younger species of the galaxy. But now he was beginning to wonder if that superiority had been real or just an illusion. "How many humans worked for the Empire?" he asked quietly. Silthara consulted her tablet. "The records are incomplete, but our best estimate is around 200,000. 200,000, Mordain repeated. "Out of a total imperial population of 50 billion. How could so few people be so important? I think, Sothara said carefully, that they were more important than we realized. Ambassador Kelthas of the pacifist Eldarin Republic was known throughout the galaxy for his calm wisdom and careful analysis. He had served as a diplomat for over a century. He had seen wars start and end. He had watched civilizations rise and fall, but he had never seen anything like what was happening. Now, Kelthas sat in his study, surrounded by reports and data files. He had been researching the human departure for weeks, trying to understand its full impact. What he had discovered terrified him. Humans had not just been participants in galactic civilization, they had been the foundation of it. They had designed the computer systems that managed interstellar trade. They had created the algorithms that made hyperspace travel safe and reliable. They had built the communication networks that connected distant worlds. They had developed the medical technologies that had eliminated diseases. They had solved the engineering problems that had allowed other species to build their great cities and factories. For 50 years, humans had been quietly making galactic civilization work. And now they were gone. Kelthas pulled up a statistical analysis that his research team had prepared. The numbers were shocking. Human innovations and discoveries were responsible for nearly 70% of the technological advances of the past 5 decades. Human workers had operated or maintained the critical infrastructure of dozens of worlds. Without humans, galactic civilization was not just damaged. It was impossible. His assistant, a young Eldarin named Tolevin, entered the study with yet another report. Sir, Tolevin said, we have received a communication from the Emergency Council meeting on Kepler Station. What did they decide? They want to send a diplomatic mission to find the humans and negotiate their return. Kelthas almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. And who do they plan to send this message to? The human embassy is closed. The human representatives have all left. We do not even know where they went. The council believes the humans are hiding somewhere in the outer rim. They think it is just a political gesture and that the humans will come back when they have made their point. The council is wrong, Kelthas said quietly. This is not a political gesture. This is an evacuation. The humans are not coming back. Tolevin looked shocked. But sir, they cannot just leave the galaxy. This is their home too, is it? Kelthas asked. We spent 50 years telling them they did not belong here. We told them they were primitive and inferior. We took credit for their achievements and ignored their contributions. Why would they consider this place their home? Meanwhile, on the edges of civilized space, the effects of the human departure were becoming impossible to ignore. Trade routes that had operated efficiently for decades were falling apart. Communication with remote colonies was becoming sporadic. Industrial facilities were shutting down as their complex machinery broke down without proper maintenance. The Draknari Empire, which had once threatened to conquer the entire galaxy, was struggling to maintain supply lines to its own military bases. General Thaxmer found himself dealing with logistics problems instead of planning conquest. The Corvani Commercial Federation was losing money as their trade networks collapsed. The Altaran Empire was facing revolts on worlds where the infrastructure had failed and people were suffering, even the peaceful Eldarin Republic was struggling to maintain the advanced technology that defined their civilization. And through it all, the remaining species kept expecting the problems to fix themselves. They kept waiting for someone else to step in and solve the crisis. They kept hoping that the humans would come back and make everything work again. But the humans were gone. And they had taken with them not just their knowledge and their skills, but their willingness to keep galactic civilization running for species who had never appreciated what they did. 3 months after the human departure, the galaxy was beginning to understand what they had lost. But understanding the problem and solving it were two very different things. The humans had built galactic civilization over 50 years of patient work. They had solved thousands of complex problems and created systems that seemed to run automatically. Now the other species were discovering that nothing had ever been automatic. It had all depended on human intelligence, human dedication, and human expertise and all of that was gone, disappeared into the void between stars, leaving behind only silence and the growing realization that the galaxy was falling apart. The species who had called humans primitive were about to learn what primitive really meant. They were about to discover what life was like without the foundations that humans had quietly built beneath their feet. The silence was falling across the galaxy. Captain Park Ji-won stood on the observation deck of the colony ship New Horizon and looked out at the stars. But these were not the stars she had known all her life. These were the stars between galaxies in the vast empty space where no one had ever traveled before. The human fleet stretched out as far as she could see. Thousands of ships of every size and type. Colony ships carrying millions of people. Cargo ships loaded with the tools and resources needed to build a new civilization. Military ships protecting the convoy. Science ships exploring their new territory. It had taken 6 months to travel from the Milky Way to this place. 6 months of careful navigation through space that had no maps or guidelines. But human engineers had solved the problems, just as they always did. "Admiral," her communications officer said, "we are receiving reports from the scouting teams." Ji-won turned away from the window. She had been promoted to admiral when the fleet was organized. The old ranks and positions of galactic civilization no longer mattered. Humanity was starting fresh. "What have they found?" she asked. 3 star systems with planets that could support human life. "The 4th scouting team has found something even better. A solar system with 7 habitable worlds. And rich asteroid fields for mining." Ji-won smiled. For the first time in months, she felt truly hopeful about the future. "Begin colony preparation immediately. Send the engineering teams to start surveying the best locations for settlements." Behind them in the Milky Way galaxy, the situation was getting worse every day. Supreme Overlord Thaxmer of the Draknari Empire sat in his war room and studied battle maps that no longer made sense. For 50 years, the Draknari had been the most feared military force in the galaxy. Their armies had conquered dozens of worlds. Their fleets had dominated entire sectors of space. Now they could barely supply their own troops. "General Crothall," Thaxmer said to his chief military advisor, "explain to me how the greatest army in galactic history cannot get food and ammunition to its own soldiers." General Crothall was an old warrior who had fought in 30 campaigns. He had never looked as frustrated as he did now. "Supreme Overlord," he said, "our supply system was managed by human logistics coordinators. They created computer programs that tracked every shipment, every delivery, every need of every unit in our military. When they left, they took those programs with them." "So make new programs," Thaxmer growled. "We have tried." But the human systems were incredibly complex. They took into account thousands of variables that our programmers do not understand. Supply routes, fuel consumption, storage requirements, transportation schedules. The humans made it look simple, but it was actually more complicated than our weapon systems. Thaxmer stood up and walked to the large map that covered one wall of his office. It showed the Draknari Empire at its peak, with red markers indicating military bases and conquered territories across dozens of star systems. "How many of our bases are currently cut off from supplies?" he asked. 40%, Crothall replied quietly. "And the number is growing every week." Thaxmer stared at the map. The Draknari Empire had been built on military conquest and the fear of their superior organization. Now they were discovering that their organization had never been theirs at all. It had belonged to the humans they had dismissed as weak and primitive. "Contact the outer bases," he ordered. "Tell them to begin foraging for local resources. We will adapt and survive as warriors should." But even as he gave the order, Thaxmer knew it was not enough. You could not run an interstellar empire on local resources. You could not maintain advanced weapons and spaceships by foraging. The Draknari Empire was slowly starving to death. Researcher Vixani worked alone in her laboratory on the academic world of Skolara. She was one of the galaxy's leading experts on civilizational analysis. Governments often asked her to study The rise and fall of ancient cultures and extinct species. Now, she was studying the collapse of her own civilization. The data was terrifying. Across the galaxy, technological systems were failing at an accelerating rate. Communication networks were going dark. Transportation systems were breaking down. Industrial production was dropping every month. Vixani had created a computer model to predict how long galactic civilization could survive without human expertise. The results made her feel sick. 18 months, she said to herself, staring at the numbers on her screen. Maybe 2 years if we are lucky, then it all falls apart completely. She had presented her findings to the Galactic Emergency Council 3 times. Each time they had dismissed her conclusions as too pessimistic. They insisted that the other species could learn to replace human knowledge given enough time, but Vixani knew better. She had studied the humans for years. Their approach to science and engineering was fundamentally different from other species. They were more creative, more willing to try new approaches, more persistent in solving difficult problems. Other species had specialized knowledge in narrow fields. Humans had been generalists who could work across multiple disciplines and connect ideas in ways that no one else thought of. Replacing that kind of intellectual diversity would take generations, not years. And they did not have generations. They had months before critical systems began failing beyond repair. Trade Baron Nexol was the richest individual in the Corvani Commercial Federation. His shipping company controlled trade routes across half the galaxy. His wealth was legendary, his influence enormous. Now he was watching it all disappear. "Sir," his chief financial officer said, entering his luxurious office on the trade world of Nexus Prime, "we have lost another 12 cargo ships this week." "Lost how?" Nexol asked, though he already knew the answer. "Hyperspace navigation failures. The ships jumped to the wrong coordinates. We have search teams looking for them, but hyperspace is vast. The chances of finding them are very small." Nexol walked to the window that looked out over the busy spaceport of Nexus Prime, but it was not as busy as it used to be. Half the landing pads were empty. Many of the ships that did arrive were carrying news of failed deliveries and missed connections. "How many navigation computers are still working properly?" he asked. "Less than 30%. And the number drops every week as more systems fail." "What about hiring new navigation experts?" "Sir, the navigation systems were designed by human mathematicians. The algorithms they created are incredibly sophisticated. Our best computer scientists are trying to understand them, but it is very slow work." Nexol had built his fortune on the reliability of interstellar trade. Customers knew that his ships would arrive on time with their cargo intact. That reputation had made him rich beyond imagination. Now that reputation was being destroyed by forces beyond his control. Every failed delivery cost him money and credibility. Every lost ship was a disaster that he could not afford. "Begin shutting down the long-range routes," he ordered. "Focus only on deliveries within a single star system. At least those do not require hyperspace navigation." It was a decision that would have been unthinkable a year ago, but it was the only way to save what was left of his business empire. On the empty world that had once been called New Bisan, archaeologist Kinrath wandered through the abandoned human city. The buildings were still standing, but they were dark and silent. The power had failed weeks ago. The water systems had stopped working. Nature was already beginning to reclaim the streets and parks. Kinrath was part of a research team trying to understand where the humans had gone. They had searched through the empty buildings, looking for clues about humanity's destination, but they had found almost nothing. The humans had been very careful to erase their records before leaving. Computer files had been wiped clean. Paper documents had been destroyed. Even the maintenance logs for basic city systems had been deleted. It was as if the humans had never intended to come back. Kinrath entered what had been the city's central library. The shelves were still full of books, but they were all in human languages. The computer terminals were dead, their memories erased. On one wall, someone had left a message written in simple galactic standard. We built this galaxy's future. Now we will build our own. Kinrith stared at the message for a long time. It was the only clue the humans had left behind, and it suggested that their departure had not been an emotional reaction to the failed peace talks. It had been a planned decision made with careful thought and preparation. The humans had not left in anger. They had left in disappointment. As reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy, a terrible picture was becoming clear. The humans had not just been one species among many. They had been the species that made all the others possible. Their engineering had built the infrastructure of galactic civilization. Their science had solved the fundamental problems of interstellar travel and communication. Their logistics expertise had managed the complex systems that kept everything running smoothly. Other species had provided raw materials, manufacturing capacity, and military power. But humans had provided the knowledge and skills that tied everything together. Without them, the galaxy was not just damaged. It was impossible. The reckoning had begun. Civilizations that had stood for thousands of years were crumbling in months. Technologies that had seemed eternal were failing without the humans, who understood them, and somewhere in the void between galaxies, Admiral Lee Tiemann stood on the observation deck of New Sol Station and watched the sunrise over humanity's first city in the Andromeda Galaxy. The city sprawled across the surface of a world that humans had named Hope. It was beautiful in a way that no human city in the Milky Way had ever been allowed to become. 1 year had passed since the Exodus. 1 year since humanity had left the galaxy that had never truly welcomed them. In that short time, they had accomplished something amazing. Admiral, Dr. Kim Soo-young said, joining him at the observation window, the latest reports from the colony worlds. Tiemann took the tablet she offered and read through the data. 15 human colonies were now established across 7 star systems. The population was growing rapidly as families settled into their new homes. Industrial facilities were producing everything needed for a thriving civilization. Most importantly, humanity was safe. And free? The fusion technology improvements? He asked. Working perfectly, Soo-young replied with pride. We have achieved energy efficiency rates that are 30% higher than anything we built in the Milky Way without alien oversight. And regulations, our engineers have been free to innovate. Tiemann smiled. And the new hyperspace drive designs? Even better. Captain Cho Minho's ship completed a test voyage to the far edge of Andromeda in just 3 days. The same journey would have taken weeks with the old technology. Through the observation window, Tiemann could see the construction sites where humanity was building its future. Massive space elevators reaching up from the planet's surface. Orbital factories producing advanced materials. Research stations where human scientists were making discoveries that would have been impossible under alien restrictions. In just 1 year, free from the limitations imposed by galactic civilization, humans had advanced their technology by decades. Engineer Yang Hyun-woo was leading the construction of humanity's greatest achievement, a ring-shaped habitat around the star they had named New Sun. When completed, it would house 1 billion people in perfect comfort and safety. The project was moving faster than anyone had thought possible, without alien committees to slow down decisions, without alien regulations to limit their creativity. Human engineers were accomplishing miracles. Yang, his assistant said, approaching with the daily progress reports, the outer ring sections are ahead of schedule. We might complete the entire project 6 months early. Yang looked up from his workstation and grinned. Then let us aim for 8 months early. There is no reason to go slow when we have everything we need. The assistant laughed. It was something humans did often now. They laughed with joy at their achievements. They laughed with relief at their freedom. They laughed with satisfaction at proving wrong everyone who had called them inferior. Meanwhile, in the Milky Way galaxy, the collapse was accelerating. Chancellor Mordain sat in what had been his magnificent office, but the lights were dim now, because the power grid was failing. His empire, which had once controlled hundreds of star systems, now barely managed to maintain contact with its closest colonies. Chancellor, his aide Sulthara said, entering with yet another disaster report. We have lost contact with the entire Outer Rim sector. The communication relays have failed completely. Mordain did not look up from his desk. He had aged 10 years in the past 12 months. The stress of watching his civilization crumble was destroying him. How many worlds can we still reach? He asked quietly. 43, sir. Down from over 300 this time last year. The Ultron Empire was dying. Not from war or plague or natural disaster, but from the simple inability to maintain the technology that had made it possible. Without human expertise, the complex systems that connected distant worlds were failing one by one. Sir, Sulthara continued carefully, there are reports of civil unrest on several worlds. When people cannot get food or medical supplies, they blame the government. Of course they do, Mordain said bitterly. They do not understand that the government is as helpless as they are. The Draknari Empire had already collapsed completely. Supreme Overlord Thaxmer was dead, killed in a revolt by his own starving soldiers. The mighty military machine that had once threatened the galaxy had broken apart into small groups of fighters struggling over the remaining resources. The Corvani Commercial Federation had dissolved when Trade Baron Nexel's shipping empire went bankrupt. Without reliable transportation, trade between worlds had become impossible. Only the Eldarin Republic still maintained some semblance of order, but even they were struggling. Their peaceful society had depended entirely on advanced technology to provide for their people's needs. As that technology failed, they faced choices they had never had to make before. Ambassador Kelthas had become the unofficial leader of what remained of galactic civilization. It was not a job he had wanted, but he was one of the few diplomats with the wisdom and experience to understand their situation. He sat in an emergency council session with representatives from the surviving governments. The meeting was held on a neutral station that still had power and life support, though no one knew how long that would last. My friends, Kelthas said to the small group gathered around the table, we must face the truth. Our civilization is ending. The other representatives looked uncomfortable. They had all hoped that someone would find a solution, that some miracle would save them. But after a year of continuous disasters, even the most optimistic among them were beginning to understand the reality. Perhaps, said the Corvani delegate, we could send a message to the humans, apologize for our mistakes, ask them to return, and help us. With what? Asked the Ultron representative. We cannot even send messages to our own colonies anymore. How would we reach the humans in whatever distant place they have gone? Kelthas had been thinking about this problem for months. His research teams had tried every possible way to locate humanity, but the humans had been very careful to leave no trace of their destination. Even if we could find them, Kelthas said sadly, why would they help us? We spent 50 years telling them they were not welcome. We took credit for their achievements. We dismissed their contributions. We called them primitive. He stood up and walked to the window that looked out at the stars. Many of those stars now had worlds where no one could communicate with the outside galaxy. Worlds where technology was failing and people were suffering. We had a choice, he continued. We could have treated the humans as equals. We could have learned from them. We could have built a galaxy where all species worked together in mutual respect. He turned back to face the group. Instead, we chose to believe that we were superior. We chose to think that humans were just lucky, not talented. We chose to ignore their contributions and take them for granted. Now we live with the consequences of our choice. Far away in the void between galaxies, Captain Cho Minho was leading a scientific expedition to explore a nearby galaxy cluster. His ship, now equipped with the latest human technology, could travel distances that would have been impossible just a year before. Captain, his science officer reported, we are detecting signs of intelligent life in the target galaxy. Multiple species, multiple civilizations, Minho nodded thoughtfully. Are they as advanced as the species we left behind in the Milky Way? It is hard to tell at this distance, but probably not. Their technology appears to be several centuries behind. What we achieved in cooperation with the Milky Way species? Good, Minho said. Then if we decide to make contact, we can approach as equals, not as junior partners or primitive newcomers. The exploration of Andromeda and the nearby galaxy clusters was revealing something wonderful. There were many other intelligent species in the universe. Some were more advanced than humans. Some were less advanced. But none of them had the arrogant attitude that had made life in the Milky Way so difficult for humanity. Humans were finding their place in the universe, and it was a much better place than they had ever been offered before. Back on Hope, Admiral Tiemann received a message that he had been expecting but dreading. His communications officer brought him a tablet with a worried expression. "Sir," she said, "we are receiving transmissions from the Milky Way, very faint, very broken. It appears to be some kind of distress signal." Tiemann looked at the message. Fragments on the screen. Words like help, dying, please, and sorry appeared among the static and interference. "Can you clean up the signal?" he asked. "I have tried, sir. But the transmission is very weak and badly corrupted. It would take weeks of work to make it fully readable." Tiemann stared at the screen for a long moment. Somewhere in their old galaxy, someone was desperately trying to contact humanity, begging for help, apologizing for past mistakes. It was exactly what the human leadership had predicted would happen. "Sir?" the communications officer asked. "Should I work on cleaning up the message?" Tiemann thought about the years of dismissal and disrespect. He thought about the meetings where human achievements were ignored. He thought about the aliens who had called his people primitive and unworthy. He thought about the new life humanity had built in Andromeda, the freedom they had found, the progress they were making without alien interference. "No," he said finally. "Delete the message, sir? Delete it," Tiemann repeated calmly. "We are not responsible for cleaning up the mess they made."